All right, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the video conference this afternoon on mentoring adult learners. And I'd like to welcome the participants and the presenter, Dr. Catherine Hansman. Dr. Hansman is an author and contributor for several journals, including the Journal of Adult Basic Education and Excellence in College Teaching. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to mute your microphones. And if you would like to be unmuted, then you can submit a request in the chat and I will be sure to take care of that for you. And we'll also provide the email address for Dr. Hansman towards the end of the conference if you have questions or comments that you would like to forward to her. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kathy Hansman.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me here today. As you know, since you're here, the topic is mentoring adult learners. And what I'd like to do before I start is talk a little bit about how I became interested in this topic. As many of you probably have had throughout your life, you've had different mentors. I have too. As a child, I had family and I had some very good Girl Scout leaders. I was very involved in Girl Scouts. In my work life after my initial bachelor's degree, I also had some very strong women mentors who took an interest and tried to help me. I was working for the Air Force as a civilian in the Air Force, and it was pretty much a man's world at the time. So it was nice to have some people who could really sort of support me in my work. But I guess I really became interested in this topic when I began my doctoral work at Ball State University. We being a group of women and I, were mainly, the program was mainly made up of women, but all the professors were males, so we had no real role models, which, is not necessarily, detrimental. But what was a little disturbing at the time was that the male professors, though they were very good and very supportive of us, were not very supportive of us as we were finishing up the program and looking towards careers in academics. In academia, they would more or less give career tips or job postings to the male students and not give them to the women students. So because of that, we sort of formed our own little peer mentoring group where we presented at conferences together, we traveled together, we studied together, we critiqued each other's writing, and really just tried to, become more and more understanding of the roles we were taking on in academia. So from that, I just started becoming more and more interested in how mentoring is so important in adult education context. And so that's where my work began, sort of examining this peer mentoring group we had, and then has continued on off and on throughout my career. If you look at mentoring or think about mentoring, and I pulled this off the internet yesterday, but you'll see lots of these words that may be connected to mentoring: model, coaching, group, team, leadership, leaders, organization, power, tasks, performance. Those are all concepts that are typically associated with mentoring. So we'll be talking a little bit about some of those today. We'll also be talking about other types or other ideas related to mentoring, as mentoring has ideas about mentoring, and is particularly mentoring within adult education context has developed throughout the years. So mentoring, many students and educators consider mentoring very, essential to helping students be successful in both their personal and professional lives. It's in many ways, it's viewed as integral to learning in the workplace, but it's largely dependent on the quality of relationships developed between mentors and protégés. And if you see it on the lower right side of the screen that you're looking at, those are some of the concepts we'll be discussing today in this presentation. Definitions reflect the complex and multifaceted ideas that are connected about mentors, including more formal types of mentoring or career types of mentoring, as well as psychosocial or informal types of mentoring. Alston, in her research, defined mentoring as involving a supportive relationship between less experienced individuals and more experienced individuals, which is a pretty typical kind of definition of mentoring, particularly in the past, though recently I think they've become a little more complex when they define them. Merriam, who did some research back in the early 80s on mentoring and mentoring relationships, also defined it, but she included sort of the psychological support as well, professional support to help people achieve both career and personal successes. Caffarella, Daloz, and Levinson take, I guess, a more, not really spiritual, but a more, I think, a more comprehensive kind of view of mentoring. Caffarella, who also did research in mentoring in the 90s, defined mentoring as intense caring relationships. So a little bit different than a career, though it could certainly still encompass career growth. Daloz, who's probably written the most, or is most connected, I think, in people's minds to adult ed and mentoring, talks about mentors as being interpreters of the environment that give us the magic that allows us to enter the darkness, a talisman to protect us from evil, a gem of wise advice, a map, and sometimes simply courage. So he really took, I think, in some ways I sort of view it as sort of a mystical view of mentoring. And then Levinson et al. In their research back in the 70s, which really I think sort of started the whole sort of academic view of mentoring, when they were looking at the career paths of mostly all males, students in a university. They viewed, mentoring obviously as crucial to growth and development, and that mentors are teachers, advisors, and sponsors. I took, in my 2000 chapter on mentoring in the Handbook of Adult and Continuing Education, I took a view or trying to sort of bring together both the career and the psychosocial ideas and concepts of mentoring in describing mentoring as integral to learning in the workplace and in other formal and informal learning contexts to receiving career help and for developmental and psychosocial support. Zachary, who's also written quite a bit about mentoring, describes mentoring as reciprocal and collaborative learning between two or more individuals who share mutual responsibility and accountability for helping a mentee work toward achievement of clear and mutually defined learning goals. Excuse me. What I like about Zachary's definition here is at the end when she talks about mutually defined learning goals, because a lot of the earlier definitions of mentoring seem to more or less assume that the mentee or the mentor, male or female, was all knowing and would just sort of define all these goals, whereas some of the newer models or the newer concepts of mentoring discuss mentoring as being more mutually collaborative types of relationships. Spiritual aspects of mentoring also are been Leona English in particular did a lot of research concerning mentoring back in the early 2000s and the 90s. She talks about mentoring relationships individuals to be and to become. So in other words, understand where they are and also where they want to go. Here he talks about the I-thou relationship, the spiritual practice in which individuals show care, respect, and concern for each other, whereas Zeldin discussed mentoring as informal relationships in which respect is reciprocated, and further that everyone has life experiences to share. And again, this is something that the idea that everyone, including mentees, protégés, and mentors, have life experiences to share, I think ties it more closely back into adult learning when we think about, adult, especially, particularly Knowles' concepts of who the adult learner is, and that everyone has something to share and everyone has experiences that not only helps them grow and learn, but others help grow and learn. And then English, Fenwick, and Parsons talk about mentoring as being about support and increasing the human spirit. And their concept of mentoring, that it's not about increasing the bottom line. So they firmly see mentoring as trying to be supportive and psychosocial support of individuals. So mentoring relationships are influential in helping individuals recognize their potential and their possible selves. Fletcher's construct, possible selves constructs, framing mentoring relationships, show the realization that possible selves occurs in a social dialogic context. In other words, the way mentors and protégés or peers engage in conversation and dialogue, and how that helps them grow and develop. Rossiter, in her work on possible selves, talks about them that possible selves are psychologically accessible and personally meaningful, and that mentoring relationships may serve as conduits between current and desired selves through the interactions among mentors, protégés, and peers. So I think you can, hopefully you're seeing a little sort of progression or trend here from mentoring being defined as hierarchical to a more, how do we define it among ourselves if we're engaged in these relationships? When you look at mentoring or concepts of mentoring, you typically see informal and formal mentoring relationships. Informal mentoring is most closely probably associated with more psychosocial mentoring or personal kinds of mentoring, though it can also be certainly around careers also. But informal mentoring is usually relationships formed around mutual interests or goals between the protégé or mentee and the mentor. Whereas formal mentoring programs are more constructed and very defined in terms of steps and who can participate and how they might participate. And also they're largely and many times developed by organizations or educational institutions to provide opportunities for mentoring. In higher education programs, the goal of formal mentoring programs usually is to match students to other students or faculty members based on their subject areas or research interests. And those of you in higher ed who are either faculty members or students, will see that particularly as you work on a dissertation in terms of trying to find people to work with that share your interests. Excuse me, I have a dry throat today. So there are, if you look into mentoring too, you'll see that there are many models and ideas and concepts concerning how to set up mentoring programs, both formal and informal. Galbraith and Cohen back in the mid-90s developed this model that for mentoring that has 4 phases. Early phase, where the foundations are developed, the middle phase, where mentors help their protégés define and establish goals. The third phase, where mentors and protégés engage and explore their career goals and how they're going to achieve the skills they need, and just sort of the activity of mentoring, trying to help people achieve what it is they want to learn. And then the final phase, where mentors function as models. And you'll see iterations of these phases that are, as I said, are common in many mentoring programs. Mullen and Shunk developed a phase process of mentoring also that is pretty similar to the Galbraith and Cohen one. However, so they have initiation, cultivation, separation, but then at the end they have redefinition, which is a little bit different. So I just want to run through those phases they talk about real quickly. So in the initiation phase, protégés engage in self-reflection to determine their strengths and weaknesses, and the kind of support that they hope a mentor may provide. It requires the mentee, protégé to engage in intense self-reflection and then think about not only themselves, but the types of mentor or who might be a potential mentor that might be able to help them achieve some of these things. The cultivation phase, which Mullen and Shunk describe as lasting 2 to 5 years is sort of what they consider the meat of the whole mentoring process. And this is where goals are further defined or revised as time changes and as goals change. It's where mentors and protégés agree upon how to structure the relationships, the issues they're going to face, the learning goals, think about new and different learning strategies that might help them develop skills. And this is where the work of to forge the relationship between mentor and protégé is accomplished. The separation phase is the end of, for the mentoring relation, it's the beginning of the end. So in this phase, protégés or mentees may move away a little bit from their mentor, may be more independent. Mentors, though, still providing support. You know, if you're thinking in an academic kind of context, this would be, you know, towards the end of probably a degree program where students are moving away and faculty are still being supportive and perhaps even writing letters or whatever they need to try to help support them. And then the redefinition where mentors and protégés become more like peers, and so they have to redefine the relationship. You know, how much are they going to stay in contact? Are they still, you know, do they still want to work together? Do they, you know, and if so, what might these projects look like? So it's, you know, it's a whole different way, you know, of separating from a mentoring relationship. And in my research, I think that this is a phase in any kind of model that you're using for mentoring that needs a little more work in terms of research. And, you know, how do people end mentoring relationships and how can we end them so that they're constructive for both protégés, mentees, as well as the mentors themselves. So as times are changing, you know, in different work contexts, when you think about it, a lot of people work from home now. They may not have as many opportunities to be mentored, or they may have more due to, you know, being online or things like that. But definitions, Mullen and Clematis talk about traditional definitions of mentoring have been losing traction with mentoring alternatives forging new possibilities with changing learning and work environments. And as learning contexts shift, concepts of mentoring shift also to more examinations of power within mentoring relationships and how that affects them, and then also more mutual kinds of approaches. Power issues in mentoring is an area that I've spent some time on trying to examine and really understand how mentors have power and use their power in various ways.
Hi, Kathy.
Yeah.
I have a question from Hannah.
Okay.
She says that in online live coaching field, mentoring and coaching, her experience is that these are different in part because she aligns more closely with mentoring definition. However, as you described today, coaching may be more like formal mentoring. So do you have an appreciating coaching and mentoring?
Do I have an opinion or different?
Yes. Do you have an opinion on the
I'm sorry, go on.
differentiating the two?
Okay. I guess what I think about is that mentoring is more of sort of the overall umbrella that where learning occurs, and coaching is a piece of mentoring. But I think coaching is more focused. In some ways, you might be right, Hannah, is that who it is? That it might be more of a formal kind of approach to mentoring, but it might be so focused on developing a certain skill or a certain area that it might not take into be more encompassed the way I think mentoring is. I guess in a way what I feel like is all mentors to some degree are coaches. We all, as we mentor, we take on coaching behaviors, but I think that coaching is a more narrow kind of view of mentoring versus overall mentoring, which I think maybe look more at a person in all aspects, both personally and professionally. Do you have any?
She has a follow-up question. She says, would you say that mentoring is more holistic?
I guess in my view, I would say that, yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you for your question. If you have any others, please, chime in, and I'd rather do that than just drone on and not have any feedback. So thank you. So anyway, where I was talking about it was sort of the power issues within mentoring relationships. And a lot of that has to do with the power that mentors hold but may not fully acknowledge. One way they can do this, they have this power maybe by adopting a paternalistic lens and not engage, not in sort of more or less deciding what the goals of the relationship should be versus having a discussion with the mentee or protege to try to mutually determine these goals. Another may be, as I sort of experienced as a doctoral student, where they either pass along information or maybe withhold information that might assist proteges in developing their careers or other values. Let's see how we're doing time-wise. Another way is sometimes I think mentors don't fully realize or deliberately don't help their proteges understand and navigate the organizational politics or context within their organizations that they're working to assist their future careers and career growth. Another way might be that they make assumptions about their proteges and the cultures from which they come, which may impede the advice and support they give. And I guess, I think in a way that's what happened to me as a doctoral student. There was, some assumptions made about, as a woman, what kinds of things I might be interested in for my future career. I think the biggest paradox is that although mentors seek to empower their proteges, because I think that's, the root of all mentoring relationships is helping someone develop more fully, either personally or professionally or both, the relationships themselves are entrenched in power issues. Mentoring relationships can be enriching for some, but sometimes they can be problematic for others. And in lots of cases, others may include women and people of color whose ethnicity, race, class, gender, age, ableism, or sexual orientation may not be reflective of the dominant culture within the organizations, leaving them with reduced opportunity to participate in mentoring relationships or with difficulties in finding mentors or other issues that may present difficulties. And in some ways, this is why a lot of formal mentoring programs are developed to try to more or less, help people to find mentors through in other ways, but there's still these problems that can arise. So mentoring relationships can intentionally seek to, to look at the culture of the organization and disrupt the power and try to help people understand what's going on, or they can ignore the whole thing, and mentors can ignore the whole thing and can cause some problems for their mentees in the future. Cross-cultural mentoring is, I think, another way of thinking about the power issues in mentoring. Johnson Bailey did a lot of work about mentoring in terms of cross-cultural mentoring, and that discomfort and contends that discomfort in mentoring is influenced by demographic differences, particularly race. It can be, and race can be applicable in informative and meaningful ways as a critical lens for reflecting and evaluating mentoring relationships and processes. Alston, in her dissertation research, explored the cross-cultural mentoring experiences between Black female faculty mentors and their white female doctoral student proteges. And her findings revealed that in addition to race, there are other characteristics such as age and academic roles that affected the power within the mentoring relationship. So what Alston was looking at in terms of academic roles is that some of the women mentees, proteges, were actually fairly high up in administrative roles in the university. So it was like an imbalance of power, yet the faculty member was the mentor. And so, and also there was age differences. And there's others here that like Lewis and Rees, Meriwether and Morgan, Rio and Sanders Rio all looked at age as a cultural factor in mentoring relationships. And Alston found that the mentee may not respect or trust the expertise of the mentor that is younger in age due to the traditional concept we have of mentors being older and mentees being younger. So that the mentee's age can then influence the power dynamics within the mentoring relationships where mentors are younger than the mentees. But I think what we, Jelena Alston and I have just written a chapter about mentoring for the new handbook, and we're discussing is that the notion of younger mentors to older, is not so uncommon anymore, but I think it is understudied. So it's another area of research that could really use some more exploring. Okay, so this alternative mentoring, because of the issues of like cross-cultural and power and other issues in mentoring, then Mullen and Clematis and Mullen and Schunk talk about what they call alternative mentoring concepts. And that's what we'll be talking about for the rest of this presentation is their ideas about what that means, what alternative mentoring concepts or models means, and then how the types of models that may sort of exhibit those characteristics that they talk about. They talk about alternative mentoring as being where participants are considered of equal status. People can assume the roles of mentors and mentees concurrently and share knowledge and skills. And that mentoring is a deep, equitable learning with social transformative value. So Mullen contends that alternative mentoring concepts sort of expands and even resists traditional mentoring theory, and that ideologies of alternative mentoring are value-laden, promoting the values of collaboration, co-mentorship, democratic learning, humanistic mentoring, and shared leadership. And that through alternative mentoring theories, you can view that exposes paternalism. Okay. Please make sure you have your mics muted. Thank you. It exposes the power, privilege, and exclusion that may happen in sort of traditional kinds of mentoring models. So from there, so when you turn it mentoring dyads, you can have formally organized cohort mentoring programs, you can have informal mentoring relationships between teachers and students, you can have peer mentoring among students. There's all different kinds of models, and a lot of the models we'll be talking about today will sort of encompass some of those concepts there. So I think I pretty much covered that. So empowered mentoring allows mentoring relationships to be a two-way street with give and take between mentors and protégés. It builds a climate of trust and respect, encourage protégés to be self-reflective while mentors themselves are self-reflective about the work they're doing. Promotes networking as a means to share social capital. And I believe that it also allows mentors to learn as much as protégés can from the mentoring relationship. So decentralization of mentoring and power-based mentoring relationships brings about new perspectives and approaches to the roles of mentoring. I like that little graphic. So the first model I'm going to talk about is one that Fischler and Zachary, who I talked about earlier. It's called Mentoring Best Practices. And even though I call it a model, it's really not so much a model as it is a discussion of the elements that need to go into sort of an empowered alternate kind of mentoring relationship. So that within it, mentors and protégés work to achieve goals that they mutually define to develop skills, abilities, knowledge and or thinking. So there's 7 elements to this. There's partnership, the essence that shifts from the paternalistic mentor to engaged learning by both the mentor and the protege. A collaboration of shared learning process with active dialogue through mutually defined goals. The development of future director mentors help through this active dialogue that they develop knowledge and abilities to achieve goal. The reciprocity, the understanding that between the mentor and protege that relationships is equal partnership. The learning is an active learning environment so that proteges gain insider knowledge and perspectives of organizational culture that they can critically reflect upon and learn from. And the relationship itself, knowing each other and valuing contributions that each make to the relationship. And another model I'm going to talk about here is called from conception to co-instructor to completion. And this was by Finch and Fernandez. And it's a model that was developed by them to help prepare graduate students to become teachers and instructors in higher ed or faculty members in higher ed. But, as most of us in academia know, doctoral programs do not necessarily prepare students to become teachers and to become, effective instructors. So this is a way through the faculty member working with a graduate student that they could develop a class from beginning to going through the rigmarole of getting it approved by administration, to evaluating it, and then to sort of seeing where they wanted to go from there. So the phases of the model were conception, where they have the student and the protege and the faculty member choose a topic to develop as a course. Then they can collaborate to develop the course itself, the different aspects of the course that they need to put together to have an effective course. Let me go back up a minute. So the thing is that this is not like the faculty member saying this is what we're going to do. The way this model works is that they are all working together and collaboratively as they do this. Then course approval, as I said, the student actually gets experience in working through administrative kinds of issues that happen when you're trying to get a new course approved. I know those of you who work in higher ed know what I mean, that it's a lot of back and forth and a lot of committee work that has to go into that. Then the co-instructorship, where the student protege immerses as much as possible in the teaching, that they co-design so that they have an equal role as a teacher within the course with their mentor. And then finally, when they're done, they evaluate the course, they evaluate their experiences, they sort of, when we were talking about before about the ending of a mentoring relationship, looking to what if there are future collaborations that they want to work on. So it's even though the model is, top down because it's teaching a course, it's still a very collaborative process, and in which the student, protege, and the mentor faculty member are on much more equal terms. Another model is action learning conversations, O'Neill and Virginia Marsick, and this is a structured protocol for facilitating peer coaching and mentoring as a critically reflective practice. So it provides a reflection and critical reflection to produce a process of group mentoring. It borrows upon Jack Mesereau's concepts of transformative learning in helping, so through their questioning and critical reflection, the peers/mentors identify underlying values, beliefs, and assumptions to enable participants to change a situation by changing the way they frame and act upon it. So again, thinking about transformative learning and the types of reflection and the staged process that goes through that, this is taking that and sort of putting it into a mentoring model with students and peers and engaging them that way. So the three phases they have are framing, engaging, advancing, and disengaging. Mentoring Mosaics is a model that is informal peer group mentoring, where this was developed by Mullen. Mullen is has done a lot of work on mentoring. If you're looking for someone to look to, she's developed a lot of different kinds of models. She's mostly through her work with doctoral students, but I saw her speak several years ago at a mentoring conference, and what she talked about is the reason she developed these models in part was because she was overrun. She had like 50 doctoral students, and so she needed to find a way to get them to not just depend on her, but to help themselves. So this mentoring Mosaics is a way for her to do that, for them to do that, that it's non-hierarchical and reciprocal mentoring interactions that help them address their scholarly writing, their presentation skills, graduate student life, and from there to keep moving on to eventually, to taking on a career role. So the way it works is that they form these mosaics where they act as critical friends to each other. Again, sort of looking at transformative learning, challenging long-held beliefs, encouraging critical self-reflection. It's also a lot of self-direction among the peers as they help both themselves and each other to learn skills and to learn different ways of approaching what they need to learn to become gain careers in academia. So their learning strategies were power sharing. So in other words, there was no one who was really head of the group. They all took turns co-leading and leading dialogues and discourse and giving constructive feedback, which led to some transparency and authenticity that allowed them to nurture, advise, and instruct each other in goals. I developed a model in my work at Cleveland State, I work with a lot of doctoral students. We have a PhD program in urban education in which, so it's sort of like an umbrella program, and then there's specializations under it. And the way it works is all students come in together for the first 2 years as a cohort and take all the same courses. And then the third year is when they start taking their specialization courses. And we've got specialization areas. My area is adult continuing in higher ed. There's counseling psych, there's learning and development, which is more or less K through 12 teachers. There's a school administration, there's policy. So there's all different areas, but the commonality is that these students come in together and they form very tight groups, and in a way they already are a community practice. So what I've and borrowing from Wenger's ideas of communities of practice, which are self-organized and selected groups of people, or people who share a common sense of purpose and desire to learn and to know what each other know. I decided to try to work with the students in this way and try to help them, I guess, enrich sort of their connections, and so that as students progress through the program, they can help the newer students as they come in. To do a lot of peer mentoring, which would also help faculty members to be more supportive in group settings as well as individual kinds of settings. So the 5 critical phases I've been working with are forming, connecting, engaging, concluding in new beginnings, and enduring networks. In the forming phase, obviously, that's where we talk to students. Do you want to be a part of this? And students to make a choice of whether to engage in it. The connecting is, where students meet somewhat semi-regularly, once a month or more, to sort of discuss the different things they want to learn, how they want to learn about them, what kinds of activities they want to engage in. Do they want to critique each other's writing? Do they want to work on research projects together, which then goes into the engaging, where they continue to look at their mutually defined goals and what it is they need, what kinds of careers. Not all our students are looking for a career in academia, but Most of them are looking to, if not a faculty member, to be an administrator or to be a consultant or to work in a nonprofit, or to become active in policy development. So, there's all different ways they can approach their careers. And I think this, in some ways, again, going back to, Knowles and the idea of what adult learners bring in their experience, they can bring a lot of that to this group. Concluding in new beginnings is as students, finish their courses and are moving more to their dissertations, and they may break off into smaller groups that are a subset of the larger group as they, graduate from their programs. And then I guess what I'm working really on now is really trying to help students once they graduate to still maintain some contact to really help support some of the newer students that have come into the cohort. As I said, it's sort of a work in progress. I'm working on it, so we'll see how it goes. But I think, it's really important in our work as adult educators, as faculty members, to try to think of ways to really support our students so that they can achieve what they would like to achieve. I came across this model just the other day. It's a lifelong mentoring model. And this Goodrich he's a musician, and actually my undergrad degree is in music. So and I always think now that I've spent all this time working on mentoring, how much mentoring I actually got or engaged in when I was in bands and orchestras throughout both high school and college. And so what he's been doing is working on with community music, so community, sort of not professional groups necessarily, but groups that, form community bands or community orchestras, and looking at how the participants share and receive mentoring simultaneously, so that, and I've thought about this too when I was reading, and I've really reading this just sort of gave me a clear way of thinking about what I've sort of been lurking around in my mind about my experience with music, and that, we were all mentors, we were all protégés, and we could be both at the same time. We were, helped each other with, reading music. We helped with rhythm. We helped with fingerings on instruments, things like that. So it was a fluid process, and that the mentoring roles are not always as clearly delineated as they are in traditionally mentoring constructs. So I think, so transferring this out of music, but thinking about, in throughout your life, how you move sort of fluidly from being a mentor to being a protégé, depending on the context, depending on the situation, depending on your job, or, the things change, and that in some instances you definitely can mentor others, in other instances you need mentoring yourself. So I think it's thinking about it as a lifelong model. I'm just I know we're getting, well, I guess we've got a little more time, but I want to briefly touch upon sort of e-mentoring and cyber mentoring or virtual mentoring. Birma and Miriam talked about learning, e-mentoring can provide learning, advising, encouragement, promoting, and modeling. And they also said that it can be more egalitarian and less bounded by traditional expectations than face-to-face mentoring relationships. I think they said that back in 2002, when I think sort of this whole idea of e-learning, it was obviously already there, but had not been as developed as it has now. I think also, social media and social networks play a role in mentoring that is largely unexplored right now, and I think that's another area that could really be looked at. Kathy King, in her work with doctoral students in Florida, has developed a flexible model of online mentoring where she works with doctoral students because as they finish their coursework, they, as those of you in academia know.
Kathy, we have a question from Hannah.
Sure.
Can you recommend a model that demonstrates mentoring and coaching with mentoring as the umbrella? And this PowerPoint with references.
Okay, well, why don't when you get my email address, why don't you send me an email and we can talk via that way. Okay, thank you. Anyway, so King's model is a way to connect her using the learning management system. I don't know if it's Blackboard or what, but to keeping her doctoral students engaged so that they engage with each other, can provide peer mentoring for each other so that they actually finish their degrees. Narina Columbaro, who is one of my students, and we did some work on e-mentoring. Narina was trying to figure out if e-mentoring was an effective way of for students who engaged in completely online degree programs. Was the mentoring through the e-mentoring effective? And what she found was that they seemed to, be happy or felt like they received effective mentoring, but that they did have some concerns about the mentors needed to be trained more in e-mentoring kinds of techniques. Burgess also looked at mentoring in an instructional online tool, and she saw that mentoring benefits students new to both academic programs and to online delivery environment, or who are members of a historical disadvantaged group. Burgess suggests that online instructors acknowledge that students need attention and nurturing beyond improving their technical skills. And this is something that Narina Columbaro also found in her research, that lots of times in e-mentoring, what happens is too much attention is placed on how do you use the technology versus the type of mentoring that might be helpful for careers. In workplaces, e-mentoring has also been pretty developed in the medical professions. Goldsby discussed nurse practitioner developmental professional networks that provided professional interactions or mutually beneficial interactions for them to address their professional development through both face-to-face and electronic means. These nurse practitioners had gone to school together and dispersed, but through staying and through this network, they were able to provide peer mentoring. An interesting one in Australia involved beginning public health advocates to participate in e-mentoring with more experienced public health advocates to engage in knowledge and skill buildings, which resulted in stronger public health workforce. And this one I thought was interesting too. Midwives in New Zealand found that e-mentoring provided an alternate to conventional face-to-face mentoring, particularly since they were widely scattered, so that they could reflect and debrief about specific cases and gain information concerning clinical practices and discuss professional issues. So I think all these areas are areas that we've discussed today, but I think most of them really have a lot of room for a lot more research, particularly looking at lifelong mentoring, the e-mentoring, other alternative theories and models that may provide more sort of demographic or more mentoring relationships that are more equal and provide both mentors and protégés with learning opportunities. As Mullen and Keeley say, decentralization of mentorship and power-based relationships brings about new perspectives and approaches to the roles of mentoring. And alternative mentoring models and theories can promote socially just relationships, organizations, and cultures that have implications for both organizational, cultural, and global contexts. I did have some questions, but we don't really have to address these questions. I know there's been a couple questions. Does anyone have any other questions?
You can feel free, if you have a question, to unmute your phone and ask.
Hi there, my name is Gwyneth Hagan. I work for a nonprofit, so I'm looking at mostly career-based mentoring. And I would just be curious to hear a little bit about any resources or thinking you have around mentor-mentee matchups and approaches to that.
There's, there's a lot of stuff out there, you know, about, I can't think specifically of one right now. I can, if you wanted to email me later, I could see what I can come up with. But if you, particularly in nonprofit work, I know there's a lot of mentoring programs, and I've run across a lot of articles that, you know, have, depending on what it is they're doing, have different ways of matching them. I think the key to that is that there has to be, if you're going to have a formal mentoring program and match people up, you have to train the mentors so that they know what it is that's expected of them. And lots of times I think mentoring programs run into problems because they just sort of think people know automatically how to mentor when they may not. But, you know, a lot of it has to do with, you know, trying to, you know, are they trying to match, you know, like with like, or are they trying to challenge people to learn, you know, cross-cultural kinds of things? So those are all things I think you have to think about when you're, you know, thinking about matching. What's the overall goal for the mentoring program to begin with? Thanks for your question.
Okay, can you hear me? I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, I know that traditionally a lot of the adult ed programs don't necessarily have a teaching certificate. What has been your experience with those who have used those graduate program teaching certificates? And is that something you think adult ed folks who want to go into academia should explore?
Okay, so you were asking about certificates for adult ed educators?
Yeah. Well, you talked about mentoring, and I'm thinking of mentoring in terms of going into the professorate. And I guess in the sense, those kind of certificate programs can offer that, but they traditionally target those who go into traditional K through 12 programs or those who are in research teaching. Yeah. So I was wondering what your experience has been with adult ed folks trying to become a part of that, or do you see the value in that being a route for them to go into academia?
Well, in my state, in Ohio, there is no certificate for adult educators. I can't think of what, I know there's a couple states that have it, but I don't think it's really a growing trend, though. I think in a way it would allow for more professionalization of adult educators, which may allow that.
Maybe I wasn't clear. These are like graduate programs that have like interdisciplinary certificates in university teaching, those kind of certificate programs.
Oh, okay. Honestly, I don't have much experience with those. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Thanks for the question, though.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Kathy, would you like to give them your email address in case anyone would like to email you directly?
Sure. I don't think I have it written here anywhere, but it's c.hansman, Hansman, at csuohio.edu. Those, if you're, you know, on the AAACE website, I'm sure you can get it from there. But
all right, I'm posting it right now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can you repeat it for me one more time?
Sure. c.hansman at csuohio.edu.
Thank you. Alan, do you have anything you would like to add? Let's see if he's on.
He might have frozen.
Are you on? Well, he may not.
Okay.
I want to thank everyone for joining our webcast today. We appreciate it. And the video will be available in about a week on the AAACE YouTube page and also on the ACE website. So you will be able to go there to get the video. And also wanted to remind everybody we do have another webcast coming up in November for the compendium as well. So more information coming out on that in the next month.
Thank you all for joining me today. I appreciate your questions, and please email me and I'll try to answer as best I can.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.